All right, well, welcome back. This is the time right now for our keynote speaker. And even though he doesn't need any introduction, I will give him one. So this is the Honorable Ralph Goodale, our Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and I thank him so much for being part of this conference today, taking time out of his busy schedule. So Mr. Goodale is a Saskatchewan boy, born and raised, and he received a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Regina and a Bachelor of Laws from right here at the University of Saskatchewan. I need to look at my list because his federal cabinet positions have been long and varied, so I'll read a few out. Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Minister of Natural Resources, Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, Minister of Public Works and Government Services, Minister of Finance, and now Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. So, j'aimerais accueillir Monsieur Goodale, le ministre de la Sécurité publique et de la Protection civile. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Goodale.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cotter, and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings and good wishes from the Government of Canada. And my thanks to Dr. Carter for her kind invitation to participate in this conference. I'm very glad to be here. And it's good to be back at the College of Law, University of Saskatchewan. It's good to see old friends like Ken Norman, who taught me torts 45 years ago. Did you? I graduated from this institution the year before Bob Arscott, whose name, of course, is associated with this conference. A year before he began his 4 decades as the Secretary of the Law Foundation of Saskatchewan. So that's a little bit of history. I also want to thank the President of the University of Saskatchewan, President Stoichev, for dropping by today. We had a very good visit when he was in Ottawa earlier this week, where he presented me with a University of Saskatchewan Huskies basketball that was autographed by all of the members of the women's team who are leading the league right now, the best in Canada. But in this era of social media and instant Twitterage, that photograph of a beaming Justin Trudeau holding the basketball got me into an awful lot of trouble with the Cougars at the University of Regina. And I understand Mr. Trudeau had some explaining to do to the Martlets at McGill, who believe they're in the race too. Anyway, the competition is intense, and that's a good thing. But coming back to the University of Saskatchewan today to participate in this conference brings back a lot of really good memories, so thank you for the invitation. With my background in government being primarily in the economic departments, agriculture, natural resources, public works, and finance, as you might imagine, I have been on a pretty steep learning curve in this new portfolio of public safety and emergency preparedness. It's an enormously complex portfolio with the department itself, which handles the administration and deals with key policy areas like emergency planning and preparedness. But also within the portfolio, you've got the RCMP, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the Canada Border Services Agency, the Correctional Service of Canada, the National Parole Board, and a whole range of review and oversight bodies that investigate and examine those agencies. Altogether, it adds up to 65,000 employees, an annual budget of very nearly $9 billion. It is the largest non-military department in the Government of Canada, and it bears the lead responsibility to keep Canadians safe. Given the Prime Minister's totally transparent publication of his mandate letters to all of his ministers, Canadians are fully aware of the ambitious agenda that he wants to see accomplished, In my portfolio, it includes, among other things, cybersecurity and cyber crime, the battle against gangs, illegal guns and drugs, the tragedies of Indigenous people and those with mental illnesses in our criminal justice system, stronger, better responses to all manner of public emergencies, whether they're caused by natural circumstances or man-made, greater support for the crucial work of first responders, including a new public safety officer compensation benefit and an effective national strategy on PTSD. In the field of national security, we need to correct the errors in the previous government's anti-terrorism bill C-51. We need to strengthen transparency, review, and scrutiny of all of our security agencies through a new committee of parliamentarians with a special statutory mandate to do that. And we need to have a far larger effort on community outreach and counter-radicalization. Now, woven through that whole mandate, as you might expect, are two essential imperatives that need to be achieved in lockstep together. First, we need to be effective in keeping Canadians safe. And simultaneously, we need to safeguard Canadian values, our rights and freedoms, and the open, generous, diverse, inclusive character of our country. In other words, the qualities that make Canada, Canada. Those who would attack us want to change all that. They intensely dislike the way we live. They seek to instill division and fear and loathing in everything we do. They want us to see our neighbors differently. They abhor tolerance and accommodation. Pluralism is anathema to them. Freedom, democracy, and respect for human differences are to be despised, according to them. We cannot enjoy our individual rights and freedoms without effective collective security. But we must achieve that collective security in ways that do not impair the very essence of that which we seek to protect. And to quote a former dean of this law college, that is often a very difficult circle to square. The new government's first big challenge arrived almost the day we came into office with our urgent initiative to rescue and resettle 25,000 Syrian refugees, escaping from the deadly scourge of ISIL and from Syria's brutally dysfunctional government. This is a large and important humanitarian project in the finest Canadian tradition. We first proposed the idea nearly a full year ago now. It earned the early support of mayors and premiers and NGOs and others right across the country. But it had to be done properly, including no compromise on the quality of the security work necessary to keep Canadians safe and to foster the long-term success of the project. That principle about safety and security was firm and solid from the very beginning. Designed through the best expertise in the Department of Immigration and Refugees with the advice and help of the RCMP and CSIS and CBSA, our approach to making sure that security was properly done involved multiple layers of security screening. The initial selection of a roster of potential newcomers to Canada was done in conjunction with the expertise of the UN High Commission on Refugees, according to very specific criteria focused upon those who were the most vulnerable and who would be in a position to make the transition to Canada quickly. And that included primarily whole families with small children. Each adult in the process was interviewed thoroughly, one by one, by skilled Canadian immigration officials. Biometric data was collected. All the details were checked against Canadian databases and American databases to see if there were any immigration or security or criminal red flags. If there was anything in the data that caused the immigration official on the case to have the slightest concern, they just set that file aside to be dealt with at a later time. After all, there were literally millions, and still are millions of people waiting for our help. Once a family was in the queue to come to Canada, identities were rechecked repeatedly and periodically to guard against any infiltration before anyone would get on the airplane. And when they arrive here, each one of the refugees is greeted and met and checked by the CBSA border officers, like all new arrivals to Canada. To put this in context, CBSA, the Canada Border Services Agency, processes some 270,000 people seeking to enter Canada every single day. So managing this flow of refugees was not a huge strain compared to what they normally do every day. In our Syrian Refugee Initiative, the total number of new arrivals since last November will reach the 25,000 mark either tomorrow or Sunday, which is right on target with what we expected. Settlement agencies, volunteers, donors, communities, Canadians generally have responded very positively to this initiative with a lot of warmth and compassion, showing once again that Canada is a country built by diversity and stronger because of it. We are fundamentally a safe and peaceful nation. But, as we all know, we are not immune to tragedy, as demonstrated by the horrible events in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu and in Ottawa in October of 2014. 2015 was another year of international horror and loss, twice in France, and then in San Bernardino and elsewhere. And this new year, 2016, began with the painful loss of Canadian lives in Jakarta and Burkina Faso. So unwavering vigilance is required. Canadians do need to know that their police, security, and intelligence and defense personnel are strong and professional and assiduous in doing the difficult jobs that we ask of them all of the time. Among other things, they constantly assess and they reassess the threat level to Canada and to Canadians. All relevant factors are monitored and taken into account. And as of today, Canada's threat level remains unchanged at medium, which is where it was at in October of 2014. But we always remain alert and vigilant, and so must Canadians generally. In my first few weeks in this portfolio, I've had the opportunity to meet with premiers and their justice and public safety ministers. I've met with my counterparts in the United States, the United Kingdom, France, New Zealand, and Australia. I've met with the Big City Mayors Caucus of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I've met with dozens of new MPs in this new Parliament. And I've heard from quite literally thousands of Canadians by email and social media. And there is, from all of that, a very powerful appetite for discussion and debate and engagement around the core issues in that mandate letter that I have from the Prime Minister, which is essentially, in a world of uncertainty, risk, and change, do we have the tools necessary to keep Canadians safe? And are we using all our tools in ways that safeguard our best values as a society? And when necessary, how are those two sometimes competing imperatives to be reconciled? A common thread that has become pretty obvious to me over the first 3 or 4 months in office is the need for an informed, thoughtful, inclusive analysis and consultation process. Not fear-mongering, not naivete, but the public does want to be engaged intelligently and sincerely. There was, I think, a unique moment in the painful aftermath of the tragedies in October of 2014, when Canadians could have been drawn together in common cause around this delicate intersection between security and individual rights and freedoms. The whole country shared the deep grief of those sorry days. We leaned on each other, including people on all sides in Parliament. There was a clear sense that laws and procedures needed to be reviewed and strengthened, and there was palpable will to try very hard to get it right and to do it together. Unfortunately, the government of the day decided to proceed in a different way, in a more unilateral manner, and that extraordinary moment for potential collaboration evaporated. And new legislation that many Canadians found to be seriously problematic in a great many ways, namely Bill C-51, was the result. We are committed to correct the problems with that legislation, and it's imperative that we do so. So, we are beginning a broad consultation with Canadians about Canada's national security framework. We want to hear from parliamentarians, from subject matter experts, from academics, from the general public, and from our foreign partners with whom we work on a daily basis and where we rely on each other. For example, how do we make sure in the law that citizens' rights to protest, demonstrate, and advocate are not infringed? How do we fix the deficiencies in the so-called no-fly lists to ensure only the proper use of data, to ensure that there are effective redress mechanisms, to ensure delisting where that is appropriate, and to ensure far fewer false positives, while still making sure at the same time that travel is as safe as it can be and that would-be terrorists are kept from becoming foreign fighters. What is the proper, precise definition of terrorist propaganda? There was some legal opinion last year that the way it's worded in C-51 now would actually catch some of the election campaign ads that ran in that 78-day campaign that went on forever and ever. Surely that wasn't the intention, but the language of the law is pretty loose. Where should the line be drawn between security services and police operations? What is needed to ensure that there is compliance with the Charter? In terms of stronger reviews and scrutiny of security and intelligence agencies, we are committed, as I said earlier, to establishing a new statutory committee of parliamentarians. Each one of our Five Eyes allies, that is the UK, the US, New Zealand, and Australia, together with Canada, that makes up the five. Each one of those other countries already has a parliamentary or congressional vehicle for protecting the public interest with scrutiny and oversight review. Canada is the one anomaly. The Auditor General, Sheila Fraser at the time, recommended such an innovation in Canadian security frameworks more than a decade ago. And my predecessor in this job, Anne McClellan, actually introduced draft legislation to that effect in 2005, I believe it was. But when the government changed in 2006, the idea was dropped and virtually disappeared from the public agenda. We intend to restore that initiative, and we hope to get it done this year. We'll learn as we do so from other countries' experience, because they all have an agency like this kind. We'll listen to Canadians and produce a truly Canadian review and scrutiny model that will work well for us. And we'll consider what other levels and instruments of review and scrutiny are appropriate and required in addition to a parliamentary committee, trying to ensure two things: that our police and security agencies are being effective at keeping us safe, and that our values, rights, and freedoms are being respected. My mandate letter, as you know, also deals with the threat of radicalization. If we want to safeguard our open and inclusive way of life, we should aspire to be among the best in the world at understanding radicalization and those most vulnerable to its insidious effects. How does it happen? How can we counteract the negative ideology and the messages that draw people in, especially young people? How can we best intervene while there is still time to avoid a tragedy? How do we reach out to engage the right communities and the right families and the right role models at the right time? In the words of the Aga Khan, and Human Rights Commissioner David Arnott reminded me of this last night, how do we share, instill, celebrate, and practice those precious Canadian values of inclusion, respect, and accommodation, which have made Canada, in the words of the Aga Khan, the most successful expression of pluralism the world has ever seen? Well, the Government of Canada has done some valuable research work in this field through a project called Kanishka. Engagement efforts have been undertaken by both the Public Safety Department and by the RCMP. Cities like Montreal and Calgary and Edmonton and Toronto have taken important outreach initiatives locally. The province of Quebec has developed a full provincial strategy. Other countries are expanding their knowledge bases, and they're anxious to share that knowledge. So our government will establish a new Canadian Office of Community Outreach and Counter-Radicalization Coordination. And the first order of business is to change that stupid name, so it's not a bureaucratic conglomeration, but actually means what we say. An office that has the capacity to coordinate efforts across the country to reach out, to engage Canadians in a very positive way, to find, promote, and share the best ways to build and maintain healthy, resilient communities and individuals. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my message to you today is, more than anything else, simply an invitation. There is a lot of work on the public agenda, especially in the field of national security, dealing with the problems in C-51, creating the right review and scrutiny mechanism, including a committee of parliamentarians, developing a strong, effective, sensible approach with respect to counter-radicalization, and a lot more than that. And I hope that people like you will take an interest and will be willing to help the Government of Canada shape the best possible national security framework, one that works well for Canada, for our safety, and for our values, and one that Canadians, more than anything else, one that Canadians will be able to trust. On a visit to Saskatchewan many years ago, a much younger Queen Elizabeth spoke about Canada's gentle call to citizenship. Those were her words. A gentle call to Canadian citizenship. A call that asks no one to forsake their forebears or their heritage, but simply asks all of us to respect each other, just as we would want to be respected ourselves. We haven't always lived up to that kind of a call. I think of the wartime internments of Ukrainians and Japanese. I think of, here in our own province, the arrival of the Ku Klux Klan that actually helped to elect a government back in 1929. I think of residential schools and the scourge of racism against indigenous peoples. I think of modern-day Islamophobia in some quarters. Fear and disinformation can produce painful results. We should not be naive, but neither should we ever abandon our values, because those values are what make Canada, Canada. We need to strive always to do better, and as Mr. Trudeau is fond of saying, in Canada, better is always possible.